Okay, we're going to get started. This is the City of San Diego Commission on Police Practices Ad Hoc Commission Planning Committee meeting of Friday, September the 17th, 2021. Do the roll call from the attendees list. I'm Doug Case, and I am the chair of the committee and first vice chair of the commission. We have committee members Diana Dent and Patrick Anderson, and Nancy Vaughn has resigned from the committee. And then we have our liaison with San Diegans for Justice, Kate Yavendetti, and we have Charmaine Mosley, our interim executive director, and Elena Conde. Did I say that correctly? As our executive assistant. Okay. Any public comment received?
No public comment received.
Okay. Oops. I just got a text. Let me see if that's. No. Nothing. Okay. Nothing new with regard to the budget in terms of staffing. We'll talk about the deputy executive director in a second, but anything new with regard to the administrative aid?
No, we're still waiting. We
Okay.
won't hear something. We won't hear anything until around November.
Okay, and then where are we with the executive search service for the deputy executive director?
So last week I revised the memo, the previous memo that we had created to change the title from the assistant executive director to the program manager title. That's just because the city does not have, or they do not recognize the assistant executive director title. So I also forwarded that memo to the personnel director, Doug Edwards, with the request to create the position. I also reached out to my contact person in purchasing and contracting to schedule a meeting regarding the procedures for hiring the search firm. I think they said that I was hearing that if it's $25,000 or up, there will be an RFP that's needed. And if it's lower or under 25,000, then we don't need to go that route. But we just need to know what the procedures are. So as soon as I hear back from them, we'll just go ahead and schedule that meeting. And I would like to include the CPP's leadership in that meeting as well. So we're all on the same page. I know PNC has been very busy with a couple of the commission's items. They drafted the third amendment. So that was something that was on their list of things to do, as well as the RFP. So we have a couple of items more that we need their help with.
Okay, I mean, my initial reaction is that we should see if they have a recommendation for a search firm, and see if we can get a contract for less than $25,000, maybe $24,000, and that would expedite the process. Office space, I see that we were just talking. For those of you that arrived late, we received a bid for all of the IT stuff. I don't understand much of it, and nor does Charmaine, so she's setting up a meeting to explain that. But we are moving forward. Since our staffing is a little behind too, it's not a big deal. But eventually we're going to be able to get the office space at 750 B Street. Nothing new with regard to standing rules. Anything new with regard to community outreach?
No.
Okay, and then the legal counsel contract. I think you told me, Charmaine, correct me if I'm wrong, that the RFPs are, the responses to the RFPs are due August the 24th. Is that correct?
No, next Friday, September 24th.
September.
Oh, I meant September. September 24th. Okay, so we need to start talking about. Well, and second question is, did you get an answer of whether or not we can have a community person, i.e. Kate, serve on that committee?
Yes, I was told from purchasing and contracting that we can have an outside organization, person from an outside organization, sit on that panel. And also I will not be able to sit on the panel since I, directly report to the commission.
Okay, that seems weird to me though, because this person will directly report to you. Because the executive director oversees all staff, both contract and
That's,
employee. But
yeah, that's something we can add to our, conversation with PNC, which is purchasing and contracting as well.
so, okay, so we probably need to set up a meeting with the people that are going to be on the panel to talk about, maybe we ought to wait until we see how many bids there are. And then we can set up a meeting to talk about how we're going to review them and schedule interviews and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm also waiting for purchasing and contracting to get back to me as far as, if there's any other legal, restrictions that we might have. That's something that we can discuss as soon as we get this meeting scheduled.
Okay. Then, so I know you need to get going. Let's see if there's anything else that we need.
What's the status of the attorney for the ordinance?
No, that I don't know because it isn't really in our hands. And if Henry were here, he might be able to answer that because they're going to be working with District 4.
Yeah, that we were told that it's not the city attorney is not choosing that person, that it's being handled through D4. And I was hoping that Henry or Chloe would be here so we could have an update on that.
Yeah, I was too. And Charmaine, you did send them the links too, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, a couple of us had trouble getting in this morning, so I don't.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I never had a Zoom link, by the way. I don't know about other people, but I just went through the agenda link.
I did too, and so I think that everybody was kind of in the same boat, and so that's kind of why we were delayed starting. Because apparently the emails that we were supposed to get with the Zoom link for the meetings, I guess it was one email that set it up for all of the subsequent meetings. Anyway, and I don't think any of us got that email, or if we did,
but we're here. I mean, it just means that maybe Henry and Chloe didn't get that and weren't reminded. I don't.
No,
Or just don't want to be here.
Charmaine sent out the link when we discovered that what the issue was, and so.
Yeah, they both should have received the link. Also, I wanted to add regarding outside counsel, these past few days, I've been spending a lot of time preparing and docketing the third amendment to the contract between the city and DPMC. And this item should be going before council on Monday or Tuesday of next week. It's not going to be a consent item, so I have to put together a PowerPoint this morning for this item. The action items that's before council is to increase the budget from $25,000 to $28,985 for fiscal year 2021, because we went over the maximum amount in fiscal year 2021. And also to change the references to CRB and to the name of the commission in the contract, as well as approved funding of $25,000 for fiscal year 2022.
Okay, you may want to find out why they're putting it as a discussion item.
I thought it was for, as an item for consent. So
That's why I'm saying you may want to find out why it's not on consent to see if there's any council member who had a concern about it.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, so I would contact Jim Campbell's office because they're the ones who make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else for Charmaine before we let her go?
Excellent.
Okay, and then we have the next item of business is the composition of the commission, and hopefully everybody was able to receive the email that Patrick sent out yesterday. And
I'll pull it up on the screen. to
Okay,
talk
perfect.
through it. Give me just a moment. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay, so did everyone receive this? So just to remind you all, this is our discussion about the composition of the commission. And we've been having a discussion for several months now about how to ensure representation from various constituencies within San Diego. Several months ago, were using beat maps and police district maps alongside census maps and others to attempt to come up with what turned out to be a very complicated set of algorithms. I don't know how else to describe it. And the concern was raised that if we require too much, then we're going to have a problem staffing the commission. The community response to that is if you build the commission right, then people will be eager to serve. And so I want to keep that on the table. But what we've done is to go back and rethink how to ensure that people who have had negative interactions with policing are well represented on this commission. And Henry from D4, from Councilmember Montgomery Stepp's office, made clear that that was their priority. So on the document I sent yesterday, if you go all the way to the end, you'll see we have several drafts that start with, down here where my cursor is moving, some data from beat maps, stops and searches, warrantless stops, etc. In August, we adjusted that to include representation priorities for the nominating committee using some of that data. It's here in the first line, but also prioritizing what I was then calling system impacted community members, which is a specialized phrase that a lot of people don't know. And then also to go, I went back to the community roundtables and realized that there was remembered that there was a recommendation that we also include subject matter experts, including addiction treatment specialists, people who worked with the unhoused community, migrant services, mental health services, and so on. So then I was generally, this committee, just to remind you, approved that approach. And Henry from D4 also seemed, he didn't say much about it, but he seemed to be, well, I don't want to overstate. It seemed like a good response from him, or at least lacked a negative. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm not sure how the council member's office feels, but we didn't get any immediate pushback. So what I did over the last couple weeks, first there was a NACOL webinar with various people, including colleagues we've brought in to speak to us, like the executive director of the Oakland version of the CPP, and others talking about this very issue. And I asked a question at that webinar about what language they use in their bylaws or implementation ordinance or charters to mandate seeking this kind of representation. And when I asked that question, it turns out they don't have that language. They promised to send a number of documents to all attendees, but those documents I couldn't even find language that prioritizes nominating system impacted people. So in one comment during that webinar, someone mentioned the city of Davis. And so I finally found the City of Davis Police Accountability Commission that includes the language highlighted here, which requires the Police Accountability Commission to include those with prior adverse interactions with law enforcement. The issue here, though, is that the Davis PAC is not the same as the CPP, and that's why I made this big note here in bold. They do not review confidential personnel and discipline records. They do review policy, but they're essentially an advisory committee board or community board that advise the police auditor, and they are specifically required to reading the language there, listen to, amplify, and build common ground among community members. So essentially what the Davis PAC does is it takes on all of the community engagement work of the police auditor, and they are specifically directed to represent the community in this work. So in addition to not having access to confidential documents and also specifically being geared to represent the community, and not to do the kind of work between the community and sort of actually practice accountability work. It's a different kind of PAC. So this language, I think it's helpful to see these adjectives prior adverse interactions, but I don't think we should just borrow that language wholesale. What is useful is State Bill 2, which is awaiting the governor's signature. And after the election a couple days ago, I think most folks are pretty confident that that signature will arrive. So this is the certification decertification bill that is enormously important for all kinds of reasons for the state of California. But as my note here indicates, the agency that's created by that bill does have similar powers as the CPP. The work they do is slightly different, or is significantly different, but they do have the authority to review POBAR restricted personnel, discipline, and policy materials in closed session. And so this penal code that they've developed, and this was developed through a series of amendments, is really interesting. So first we have the board consists of 9 members. The way that they divide up appointments and designated seats, it's a much smaller group of people. So it's less difficult to meet quorum in such a situation. But they do include a former peace officer with substantial experience at the command rank. A second spot is given to a peace officer with significant experience in internal investigations. 2 members of the public who can't be former police officers with substantial nonprofit or academic experience. 2 members from the public, not former police officers, who work within community-based organizations on police accountability. And again, the appointments are made, one by the governor, one by the Senate Rules Committee. And then this is the relevant section here. Well, first of all, there's the last one is an attorney who's not a former police officer, but has experience in oversight. But it's number 5 that relates to us. So 2 members shall be members of the public who shall not be former peace officers, with strong consideration given to individuals who have been subject to wrongful use of force likely to cause death or serious bodily injury by a police officer, or, and this is the part I'm happy to see alongside that former part, who are surviving family members of a person killed by the wrongful use of deadly force by the police officer appointed by the governor. So what's useful about this, first of all, is that it uses the language of strong consideration. That's similar to the language that we've been using about prioritizing. What's also useful, I think, is this language, which, given that we now have a precedent in state law, I'm going to propose we consider borrowing that language. Okay, so to scroll up to the, I don't remember which, it's the 3rd revision of what we've been trying to do. At the last meeting we had, I was asked to revise this section. And so what I've changed it to initially is community members with direct personal experience with the criminal justice system. That's what came out of our last discussion. I don't think all of us were behind it. I wasn't enthusiastic about it because the criminal justice system can include police officers. I mean, it's not specific enough for what we were looking for. So the asterisk that I've included here is, should we now replace that with some version of this, since this is what we were trying to get at before anyway. And again, this is the relevant section from State Bill 2 that's that should be signed by the governor soon. That's passed the Senate and should be signed soon. Okay, so that was an update and reminder of where we are. This committee unanimously supported including a recommendation for some sort of priority or emphasis given to these community members. We were really, at this point, we were just trying to work out the actual wording. So the question I have for you all, and I know there'll be discussion, but would you support using the SB2 in this phrase here?
I would, maybe not the exact wording, but similar wording.
Okay.
And I also like, by the way, having a family member.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be a surviving family member. It could just be a family member. You know, and they limit it to someone who's been subject to wrongful use of force likely to cause death or serious bodily injury. I would have it be more broad than that. But more specific than what we have currently with you know, personal experience within the criminal justice system. I also at some point want to revisit number 1 there, because we also talked about whether or not the highest rate of warrantless stops and searches was the best or the only criteria that we should use for number 1. So just as a aside, I'd like to go back at when we get done with this discussion and look at number 1, because I have some thoughts on that. So other people with thoughts about rewording of number 2.
Well, I mean, I have a comment if people, I actually sort of agree with Doug. I think the SB2 language is a little bit too restrictive. And I think that I mean, I understand we're just prioritizing and not mandating, but I think that we will have a lot more success finding people who have had personally or within or family members of people who have had other kinds of negative reactions, but not necessarily wrongful use of force likely to cause death or serious bodily injury. I mean, you know, people who have been subjected to racial profiling, to, sort of racist practices. I think there's obviously there's a whole other range of misconduct. And I must admit, I just got back in town this morning, so I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about this, just having read it. But that's my concern. That I think, I mean, we certainly have in San Diego a lot of people who have, you know, had the experience of wrongful use of force likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, but I still think that that's a relatively small pool.
Kate, can you help me phrase this?
Well,
Since
yeah, I wish I could.
Well, what about the language from Davis that says that those with the prior adverse interactions with law enforcement? That's
yeah, I think something more like that. I think it's broader, but I do also like the idea that it includes family members, because I mean, oftentimes people who have had these kind of negative adverse reactions are, you know, have PTSD, have any number of reasons why they would not want to be continually exposed to misconduct issues. So something more along those lines is what I was thinking.
So how's this phrase?
Yeah, I'm reading that. I think that's better. I think it's more inclusive.
yeah, and it's general enough, which I think is what Kate means by inclusive. And I think that, I mean, it kind of captures what we're looking for. That's, you know,
So we're kind of blending SB2 and the Davis pack, which I like. Diana, do you have a thought about this? Did you have to step away?
Yeah.
Oh, there she is.
I find the wording that's highlighted here in blue to be okay. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I wasn't all that comfortable with what Kate said with the one down here with strong consideration given. That wasn't. But I do like the new.
Okay. So shall we use this for now?
I think so. I think using.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a consensus.
Okay.
And really the only voting member who's not present today. Oh, we have two, Brandon and Joe. But why don't we go ahead and accept that for the time being, and maybe we can vote on it when we have more members here. But I think I'm hearing everybody who's a voting member here is in agreement. And then if you don't mind, can we go back to the first one?
Yeah. So can we, let's keep our focus on replacing that with a phrase that everybody's happy with. If that makes sense.
I guess what I was, and what my thought is that warrantless stops and searches is too limiting because it only looks at one particular aspect of experiences, and those may decrease if the protect ordinance is enacted. So I would expand upon it instead of just saying warrantless stops and searches. I would maybe have complaints of excessive use of force and complaints of discrimination.
Instead of this or in addition to this?
In addition to that.
Complaints of excessive use of force and or allegations of discrimination.
Yeah, or maybe complaints of discrimination, since a complaint and an allegation is kind of the same thing. Just be consistent.
Okay, I was trying to build in some variance, but okay. You prefer consistency and you're the chair.
And then I think that it would be more flexible, and so instead of having a rigid rubric or whatever, you could look at all three of those things over time and see what patterns exist. And then you can also look at the applicants for the commission and see if they fall within those beats. And so that provides more of the flexibility that we're looking for, because that was part of our concern, was that the proposal from the city attorney's office was too rigid. Yeah, I like that. Trends and, well, no, I wouldn't say, because it has representation from it. You don't have representation from trends. So maybe as SDPD beats that I think it's fine. Just beats that experience.
Yeah, I think it's fine, because again, the point of this first bullet point is that it's pointing to a later section that pertains to the data collection function of the CPP. And so if we leave it like this, then the CPP can determine over time how to bring this together. And I think that builds in enough flexibility from my perspective.
Okay,
While still requiring a data approach.
And refresh my memory, this is for 10 seats, right?
What is?
The G.
Correct. This is for the seats that are not
designated by geography.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. I really like it. I think it gives us the flexibility that we were asking for, and still,
Forgot the Oxford comma. There we go.
Nancy would be upset,
Nancy resigned from the committee.
but she would still be upset. Okay, Kate and Diana, thoughts on that? Are you okay with it?
I'm still mulling it over.
Kate?
Yeah, I like it better. I like it, again, I like it being more inclusive. Because
So
I can see, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know the complaints that come in and what happen, but it seems to me that there may be areas where there's more actual complaints of discrimination and profiling and, courtesy, calling people bad names and stuff, then there would be warrantless stops and searches. See that as a possibility. And that's, I think, important.
So,
Okay, so Doug, let me propose, what I'll do is I'll now go back to the document and put this up as the most recent revision and send this draft to the whole committee, and we can sort of mull it over the week and vote on it next week.
okay,
Does that make sense to everybody?
it does. And Diana, are you still mulling, or do you want to mull it?
Well, I was just thinking about when we start off, going back to what Kate just said, because she doesn't know the cases that we get. But I mean, just, over the years that I've been on there, and I'm sure you can think more about this too, Doug, is that warrantless stops and searches is generally not what the complaint is all about. So that, that usually it deals more with force. There's some discrimination, but most of the time the complaints that are coming in that we review has to do with, so I don't know. That's just my thought.
Yeah, but
that.
to respond to that, you note that the wording here says complaint-wise, we're looking at the use of force and discrimination, but warrantless stops and searches is not complaint-based. It just says highest rates of warrantless stops and searches, because you're correct. They don't, we very seldom get complaints on that, or the way that they word the complaint or categorize the complaint. It doesn't really fall into that.
Right. So I don't know, maybe because it's starting off with that is why it's just, I don't know. Starting off with that as the beginning of number one, just appears that it puts the other complaints.
How's that?
I like that better.
I understand what you're saying. I think that's a really good point. This centers CPP's own data, and
right.
Warrantless stops and searches, that's data that other organizations have collected and put out the disparities, info about, but CPP has not historically collected that data.
And that's why I said,
yeah,
the searches, warrantless stops and searches, especially the searches part is usually comes in conjunction with the excessive force or the detention kind of complaint.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. And, just going back to what Kate said, I want the community to see that our focus is on what the real focus is. That's just my thought. But.
Okay, so I think that with that, then we'll go ahead and leave that, and have Patrick write that up and send it out to the committee and including Henry and Chloe in that, and then we can have a vote on it next week. Looking at our well, and Patrick has to leave here. We have procedures for making recommendations to SDPD and requirements for SDPD response. And I think I kept that on there, even though we discussed it last time, because I noticed in the People's Ordinance, they had different timelines than we had recommended. At our last meeting, I think it was, oops. We suggested that policy recommendations should be responded to within 30 days, and that recommendations on findings and discipline should be responded to within 2 weeks. And looking at the People's Ordinance, or I'm sorry, Voters Ordinance.
Doug, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My doctor, because I have this doctor's appointment, they were just calling me, and I do have to log off.
Okay.
As I had mentioned, I'm so sorry, everybody. But I've taken notes, and I will send around revisions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think after we discuss this, we'll go ahead and adjourn for the day. My thought is that. And the Voters Ordinance, I think, recommended 1 week for findings and discipline recommendations. I think what we recommended makes more sense, 2 weeks. But I also, in thinking about it, actually think that 60 days may make more sense for more complex policy recommendations. And if we're going to write it into an ordinance as something that is a requirement, maybe we should make it 60 days for written responses for policy and practice recommendations. What do others think?
Well, I have a question about that. That would also include a written response saying, we don't have a response yet, right?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that.
Well, no, I mean, that's my question. It seems to me that a lot of times when you get the report backs in the open sessions from the police department, what I hear a lot of time is, well, we're still working on that.
That in my mind would not be a response.
Well, I mean, and that's my question. I mean, are you talking about having a substantive response or just a response saying, we're getting to that? I guess that's my question, because it does seem to me that it's important to have a pretty tight timeline. But if the reality is what you're saying is that you think the PD needs 60 days, but that it has to be a substantive, complete, full written response, not just a response that says, we're working on it. So that's my concern. That if we give them more time, it's the way it is in the law biz, the more time you give us, the more we're likely to put something off until the last minute.
So are you suggesting maybe we ought to add the word substantive response or a complete response?
Something like that. I mean, like something real instead of, the what I see often is just kind of a blow off, and we get to you when we get to it.
Okay, so do people have
but you all have more experience with that than I do. I just see what I see in the open session.
No, I think you do. I think that if I kind of agree that maybe we got to put it that way so that it's clear. Because I would not consider we're still thinking about it being a response, but they can make that other argument. And so if we put a substantive response, unless you can think of a better word.
Well, I would say a full, complete, and substantive response, not just, if your policy recommendation had one or two parts and that they respond to half of one part.
Okay, and so are full and complete the same thing?
I don't know.
How about complete and substantive? Would that sound
Sure.
okay? And so if you can get that in the minutes, Alina, that we propose, and then we can also vote on that next week too, since there's only 3 of us here. And
Well, and I don't have a vote.
right, and so anyways, I don't think we have a quorum to do a vote anyway, but we can vote on that next week as well. And since we are losing a quorum, and maybe even have lost a quorum in terms of being able to vote, unless there's an objection, we'll skip the rest of the agenda. I will say that on the agenda that I sent a revised agenda to Charmaine, and the only difference was I added 2 items to the agenda for future items for future agendas, and I'll tell you what those are. One of those is to have to revisit the standard operating procedures with regard to how we respond to officer-involved shootings when we cannot complete an investigation within a year. And so we may want to look at what our options are in that case. I won't discuss those now. I'm just telling you that's an issue I think we need to look at. And the second one was to see if, I'd like to propose that the commission have the ability to recommend positions of the city of San Diego on legislation. I understand that the city is the entity that takes a position, and so individual boards and commissions can't take positions, but we can recommend to the city council that they take a position. And I think it would be good for us to be able to for us to be able to recommend to the city council that the city take a position on critical issues related to police accountability. So we won't discuss that right now, but just let you know that those are 2 things that I would like to have on a future agenda. So I added those there. And so is there anything else that we would like to discuss today?
Well, I just had a question. Is there any thought of adding more people to this committee? Because since I've been on it, 2 people have left. And and
I know Brandon has put out a request. What he could do, and I can
see
talk
if
about,
anybody else is interested. I just
well, and there may be some people that have not signed up for a committee yet, and people are required to be on one committee, so he can approach the people that have not signed up for a committee, especially some of the new members, to see if they'd be interested in serving. Because I agree it would be helpful to replace Nancy if.
And Kevin was on when I started.
Right, yeah, and Kevin too. But now that we're down 1 more person, I think we ought to do that. So maybe you can add that to the minutes as well, Alina, a recommendation that we look for another member or 2 for the committee. Okay.
Okay.
Then without objection, we will adjourn 8 minutes early. And see you next week. Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
All right, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.